This is the story of what happened on a Tuesday morning at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind in the quiet, affluent suburb of Northwood Heights. It's the story of a man named Adrian Cole, a decorated commander in the United States Navy SEALs, who just wanted a cup of black coffee before heading to a physical therapy appointment. And it's the story of Officer Frank Brody, a 10-year veteran of the Northwood Heights Police Department, who saw a large black man in worn jeans and decided he was a threat. The encounter, which lasted less than 15 minutes, began with a woman clutching her purse and ended with an officer facing the ruin of his career and a potential six-figure lawsuit, all because he couldn't see past the color of a man's skin to the formidable authority he held. The entire incident was captured on at least 4 different cell phones, its shaky footage a stark testament to a power dynamic about to be violently and satisfyingly inverted. The timestamp on the first video begins at 9:42 a.m. The air in the coffee shop was filled with the gentle hum of an espresso machine and the smell of roasting beans. Sunlight streamed through the large plate glass windows, illuminating the polished concrete floors and minimalist wooden tables. It was a place of quiet routine, of laptops and lattes. Adrian Cole stood at the counter, his 6'3" frame relaxed but exuding a stillness that came from years of intense discipline. He wore a faded navy blue Henley, well-worn denim, and scuffed work boots, the comfortable anonymity of a man off duty. He'd just finished giving his order to the young barista, a college student named Chloe with bright pink hair, when the bell above the door chimed aggressively. Officer Frank Brody filled the doorway. His uniform was crisply pressed, but his posture was a slump of bored authority. His eyes, small and restless, scanned the calm interior of the cafe and landed, almost magnetically, on Adrian. Brody had been parked across the street, nursing a lukewarm travel mug of his own coffee, when he'd seen a woman exiting her luxury sedan flinch and clutch her designer bag as Adrian walked past her into the shop. For Brody, that was enough. Probable cause, reasonable suspicion, they were malleable concepts. What he saw was a predator, and he was the sheepdog. He swaggered in, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. "Morning, folks," he said to the room at large, but his gaze was fixed on Adrian's back. He walked up behind him, stopping uncomfortably close. "Sir," Brody's voice was a low growl, designed for intimidation. "I'm going to need to have a word with you." Adrian turned slowly, his expression unreadable. He took in the officer's stance, the slight flare of his nostrils, the calculated placement of his hand. He'd seen that look before, in far more dangerous places, on the faces of men who had already decided to kill. It was the look of someone who had mistaken stillness for weakness. "Is there a problem, officer?" Adrian's voice was deep and steady, a calm baritone that seemed to absorb the tension rather than reflect it. "There might be," Brody said, letting his eyes drift over Adrian's simple clothes with theatrical disdain. "We've had some reports of a suspicious individual in the area." Matching your description, it was a classic, tired line. The description was invariably vague and universally applicable to any black man in the vicinity of a white person's unease. The other patrons in the shop began to notice. A man in a business suit lowered his newspaper. A pair of women chatting over cappuccinos fell silent. Chloe, the barista, froze with a milk pitcher in her hand. The ambient noise of the cafe began to recede, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. Adrian didn't even blink. "Your description must be very broad, officer." "I'm just here to buy a coffee." He gestured with a slight nod toward the counter. "I'm a regular," Chloe, seeing his glance, gave a small, nervous nod of confirmation to the officer. Brody ignored her completely. His focus was entirely on Adrian, his world narrowing to this one challenge to his authority. "I'll be the judge of that," Brody sneered. "Why don't you step outside with me, pal? We can have a little chat without an audience." He placed a hand on Adrian's arm, a gesture meant to be both a guide and a command. It was his first mistake. Adrian didn't move. He didn't flinch or pull away. He simply stood there, an immovable object, and let the officer's hand rest on his bicep. The muscle beneath the worn cotton of his shirt was like stone. "I'm not your pal," Adrian said, his voice dropping a register, the calm surface now showing a hint of the formidable depths beneath. "And I'd prefer to conduct our business right here, in the light, with witnesses. Now, if you have a legitimate reason to detain me, state it." Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd remove your hand. The directness of the challenge caught Brody off guard. He was used to nervous compliance, to stammered explanations, and averted eyes. This man was looking directly at him, his gaze unwavering, analytical. It was irritating. It was, to Brody, insolent. "Oh, we got a lawyer, do we?" Brody's grip tightened. He gave a slight shove. "Listen to me, Chief. You fit the description of a suspect in a series of local break-ins. Big guy, wearing casual clothes. That's you. Now, you can come with me peacefully, or I can make this a whole lot more difficult for you. Your choice." A man sitting near the window slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised his phone, the screen facing the confrontation. Across the room, one of the women did the same. The silent cameras were now rolling. Brody was too focused on his target to notice. "The description you just gave could fit half the men in this county," Adrian stated calmly, his tone that of a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. "That's not reasonable suspicion, and you know it. You saw a white woman get nervous near a black man, and you manufactured a pretext. So, let's stop the theater. What do you really want?" Brody's face flushed a blotchy red. The accusation, so plainly and accurately stated, was a lit match on his short fuse. "What I want is your ID." Now he released Adrian's arm only to jab a thick finger into his chest. "Let's see it. Or are you going to obstruct?" Adrian sighed, a quiet exhalation of profound weariness. He had hoped this could be resolved quickly, quietly. He had meetings to attend, a life to live. But Officer Brody seemed determined to escalate, to turn a non-event into a career-defining catastrophe. "I will provide my identification," Adrian said, reaching slowly for his back pocket. "But I am doing so under protest. I want it noted that I do not consent to this stop, nor do I believe you have the legal grounds to demand it." He moved with deliberate slowness, telegraphing every motion. He knew that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted, used as an excuse for violence. He pulled out a simple, worn leather wallet. Brody snatched it from his hand before he could even open it. "Impatient, are we?" Adrian murmured, the comment laced with a bitter irony that was lost on the officer. Brody fumbled with the wallet, his thick fingers clumsy. He pulled out Adrian's driver's license, squinting at it. "Adrian Cole. Local address." Well, he looked up from the license, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Doesn't mean you're not our guy. Criminals have driver's licenses, too." He began flipping through the other cards in the wallet, his search becoming more of a violation, a rummaging through a man's private life in public. He tossed aside a credit card, a library card, a photo of a woman and 2 children. Then his fingers brushed against a different kind of card. It was stiff, with a holographic overlay. He pulled it out. It was a United States Department of Defense identification card. Brody glanced at it, his brain processing the information slowly. He saw the eagle insignia, the name, Cole, Adrian R., and the rank. He scoffed. "Oh, look at this. You were in the service. Good for you." He held the card up mockingly. "That's supposed to impress me?" A lot of guys get into trouble after they get out. The sheer, willful ignorance of the statement was breathtaking. Adrian's expression, for the first time, hardened. The patient weariness was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. "Officer," he said, and the word was now a command, not a title. "Look at that card again. Look at it very carefully. Read the rank printed on it. And then I want you to read the part that says active duty." Brody's smug expression faltered. He looked down at the card again. His eyes narrowed, then widened. The letters were small but clear. CDR, USN. Commander, United States Navy. His brain, clouded by prejudice, was struggling to connect the man in the faded Henley with the high-ranking officer on the ID card. The dissonance was too great. "This is fake," he blurted out, the accusation weak and defensive. "You can't be a what, officer?" Adrian's voice was like ice. "A commander? A black man can't be a senior officer in the United States Navy? Is that what you were going to say?" The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. Brody stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. "No, I don't look like what you expected," Adrian finished for him. "That's been the problem from the moment you walked through that door." He took a small step forward, and for the first time, Brody took an involuntary step back. The power dynamic in the small coffee shop had just tilted on its axis. "Now, give me my wallet," Adrian commanded. But Brody, panicked and cornered, made his second, and far more critical, mistake. Instead of de-escalating, he doubled down. His training, his instincts, everything was telling him to regain control, to reassert dominance. "You're not giving me orders," he snarled, trying to reclaim his authority. "You're being detained. Turn around. Hands behind your back." Now, he reached for his handcuffs. The metallic click as they were unholstered echoed in the silent room. Chloe gasped behind the counter. The man with the phone camera moved closer to the window for a better angle. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was an assault. Adrian stood his ground. "Officer Brody," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm going to tell you this one time. You are about to commit a felony. You are attempting to illegally detain and assault a commissioned federal officer in the performance of his duties. That carries a sentence of up to 20 years in a federal prison under Title 18, Section 111 of the U.S. Code. I strongly advise you to reconsider your next action." The specificity, the citation of the federal code, was like a bucket of ice water. Brody froze, the handcuffs dangling from his hand. He was a local cop. His world was traffic stops and town ordinances. Federal prison was a concept from television, not a tangible consequence for hassling a guy in a coffee shop. Doubt, cold and sharp, finally pierced his thick skull. But his pride was still in the way. He couldn't just back down now. Not in front of all these people, all these phones. "You're lying," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "You're trying to intimidate a police officer. I am stating facts," Adrian countered. "Here's another one. My commanding officer is Rear Admiral Matthews of the Naval Special Warfare Command. My direct line to the JAG Corps is programmed on my phone, which you will not be touching. When I make that call, your life as you know it will be over. Your pension, your career, your freedom. Gone." He let the words sink in. "So for the last time, Officer Brody, remove your hand from your weapon, return my property, and walk out that door." The standoff was absolute. Brody's face was a mess of conflicting emotions: rage, fear, humiliation. He was trapped. If he backed down, he looked like a fool. If he proceeded, he might be walking into a federal nightmare. His hand trembled. And in that moment of indecision, the bell on the door chimed again. This time, it was a police sergeant, a man named Henderson, older, with weary eyes and stripes on his sleeve that spoke of a long, complicated career. He had likely been summoned by a nervous Chloe or another patron. He took in the scene in an instant. Brody, red-faced and shaking, holding handcuffs, a large black man, impossibly calm, standing opposite him. A room full of people holding up their phones like a silent, digital jury. "Brody, what the hell is going on here?" Henderson's voice was gravelly and held an immediate note of authority that Brody's had lacked. Brody turned, his face a mask of relief and desperation. "Sarge, this guy? He's obstructing, refusing to comply. He's claiming to be some kind of military hotshot." Henderson's eyes moved to Adrian. He was a better reader of men than Brody. He saw the coiled power, the utter lack of fear. He saw a professional. His gaze then dropped to the military ID that Brody was still clutching in his fist. He stepped forward and gently took it from Brody's grasp. He looked at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at Adrian, and for the first time, the officer's posture changed. It was subtle, but a flicker of respect, or perhaps fear, entered his eyes. He handed the ID back to Adrian, not Brody. "Commander Cole," Sergeant Henderson said, the rank spoken with formal deference. "I apologize for my officers. Confusion. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Adrian took his ID and his wallet, his eyes never leaving Brody's. "There was no misunderstanding, Sergeant," he said, his voice cold and precise. "Your officer racially profiled me. He illegally stopped and attempted to search me without cause. He ignored my identification and was preparing to illegally detain and assault me when you arrived. Your officer is a liability and a disgrace to his uniform." Henderson winced at the blunt, accurate assessment. He knew it was true. Brody had a history of cowboy behavior, of complaints that always seemed to get lost in the shuffle. But this was different. This was a man who could not be lost in the shuffle. "Brody," Henderson said, his voice now dangerously low, "put the cuffs away. Go wait in your car." Now Brody, pale and defeated, finally seemed to understand the depth of the hole he had dug for himself. He holstered his cuffs with a clumsy click and, without another word, turned and shuffled out of the coffee shop, the silent stares of the patrons following him like daggers. The tension in the room broke, replaced by a wave of relieved exhales and whispers. Henderson turned back to Adrian. "Commander, on behalf of the Northwood Heights Police Department, I am truly sorry for this. Your apology is noted, Sergeant," Adrian said, tucking his wallet back into his pocket. "But it is not accepted. This isn't over." He pulled out his phone. His movements were now crisp and efficient. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a name. The entire coffee shop was quiet enough to hear the phone ring once before it was answered. "Robert, it's Adrian," he said into the phone. "I'm fine, but I've had an incident. Northwood Heights P.D. officer's name is Frank Brody. Illegal stop, attempted assault." "Yes, it's all on camera." There was a pause as Adrian listened. The patrons watched, mesmerized. This was the consequence, playing out in real time. "I need you to initiate a civil suit against Officer Brody personally and the Department for Civil Rights Violations. And reach out to my contact at the Department of Justice. I want them to open a federal investigation into this department's pattern and practice." "This stops today." He listened again. "Let's start the damages at $100,000 for the personal suit against the officer. We can discuss the figure for the city later. I want his badge, Robert, and I want his pension. I'll forward you the video evidence. There are at least 4 witnesses here who were recording." Sergeant Henderson looked like he was going to be sick. "A personal lawsuit. The Department of Justice." This was a 5-alarm fire, and Brody had lit the match and thrown it on a gas tanker. He could see the headlines: the internal affairs nightmare, the public outrage. His own career might be collateral damage. Adrian ended the call and looked at Henderson. "You should probably inform your chief of police that he will be hearing from my attorney, the U.S. Navy's Judge Advocate General's office, and likely the DOJ before the end of the day. You have my contact information from my license. I expect a formal statement from you and every witness here." He then turned to the barista, Chloe, whose face was pale with shock. His entire demeanor softened instantly. "I'll have that large black coffee now, please," he said, his voice returning to the calm, gentle tone he'd used when he first walked in. Chloe, shaking slightly, nodded and quickly began to prepare his drink. The transaction was surreal. He paid with his credit card, the picture of normalcy in the wreckage of Officer Brody's career. As he waited, the man who had been filming by the window approached him cautiously. "Sir," the man said, holding out his phone. "I got the whole thing. Clear as day. I'll send it to you. I'll testify. What he did was. It was just wrong, thank you," Adrian said, taking the man's information. "I appreciate that." One by one, the other witnesses with phones came forward, offering their footage, their support. They had seen the injustice, and the spectacular reversal had galvanized them. They were no longer silent bystanders. They were now part of the story, part of the accountability. Chloe handed Adrian his coffee, her hand still trembling. "I'm so sorry you went through that," she whispered. "It's not your fault," Adrian replied, giving her a small, reassuring smile. He took a sip of the hot coffee. It was good. He turned and walked toward the door, the crowd parting for him as if he were royalty. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Sergeant Henderson, who stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, the weight of the impending storm settling on his shoulders. "Tell Officer Brody something for me," Adrian said, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room. "Tell him that the uniform he wears is supposed to represent justice, and when he uses it to bully and intimidate, he dishonors everyone who has ever worn it with integrity, including me." With that final, devastating pronouncement, Commander Adrian Cole walked out into the sunlight, leaving behind a shattered coffee shop, a terrified police sergeant, and the smoldering ruins of one officer's arrogance. The karma had been instant, and it was absolute. The videos went viral within hours. The story was picked up by local, then national news. The Northwood Heights Police Department was deluged with calls. Officer Frank Brody was immediately suspended without pay, pending an internal and a federal investigation. The city's attorneys went into crisis mode. But for Adrian Cole, it was just another Tuesday. He had faced down threats far greater than a prejudiced cop. But he knew that this fight, in a quiet coffee shop in a sleepy suburb, was just as important as any battlefield. It was a fight for the simple right to exist, to get a cup of coffee, to be seen not as a threat, but as a man. A man who, on this particular day, just happened to be a weapon of justice, forged in the fires of discipline and wielded with devastating, quiet calm.